Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here with so many of my Senate Republican colleagues to talk about an issue that actually is not partisan. A lot of times we have important things to say here and call out injustices that are of partisan nature, political nature, but this is a very simple, straightforward, but important regardless of whether you're Republican or Democrat. It's mostly an upstate New York issue. However, that's not completely true, as you're going to hear in a minute. And our ultimate ask today is we're trying to draw attention to the fiber optic fee that is affecting our broadband build out in upstate New York communities. And what we're asking for is the governor to, in her 30-day amendments, remove the fiber tax. And we're going to explain why and touch on how that affects our communities and is holding New York State back. So this is about economic, educational, and geographic fairness. Years ago, then Governor Cuomo made the promise that 99% of New Yorkers would have broadband access. That was in 2015 when the state put $500 million behind that in the state budget to leverage another $500 million of private investment. So $1 billion has gone into improving it, and there have been improvements made. However, anyone that lives north of the Tappan Zee Bridge will tell you that our communities are not at 99% service, and certainly the more rural areas you get to and the more mountainous terrain that you get to, and that number shrinks below 90% very quickly. And it's holding our children back, it's holding our businesses back, it's holding our state back. So in 2019, New York State authorized a fiber optic tax in the state budget, and that's important to remember. And it's assessed on fiber optic that is run in state right-of-way highways. This fee only applies to broadband providers. Coaxial cable and utilities like gas, water, telephone, power, sewer are all exempt. It only affects fiber optic lines, and that's important to remember because that's where it's going to circle back and affect people that already have broadband access. So remember that for a second. Based on conversations in my office we've had with service providers, this tax, along with the associated cost of surveying. So when you run a fiber line on a state highway and you need to pay a tax on that fiber optic line that you're running, DOT is also requiring that you have a land survey done, which becomes very expensive very quickly. The design and engineering raises the cost of fiber optic cable from maybe a few $100s to run a line down a road to literally now $5,000 to $7,000 per mile if that line is being run down a state highway. So again, remember, we're going from maybe a few $100s cost to now $5,000 to $7,000. Local governments have received federal grants and IDA funds to boost broadband access, but the fiber optic tax applies to these grants as well. Because of this, simple repairs and extensions of service lines just don't happen. They become too expensive. These excessive costs punish rural communities and smaller internet service providers. Providers have had to cancel projects because the DOT fees and survey costs have exceeded the project's abilities to be sustainable. Because of the fiber optic tax, providers can't economically extend service even a few thousand feet without encountering ongoing losses. We've received calls from people that can see the providers doing work in the right-of-way down the road, and they're calling and begging, why can't they come up the road and pick me up? And they won't because of these fiber tax and survey costs. In addition, this tax is a disincentive for coaxial cable and existing service providers to upgrade or improve their lines. So those of you that have one of the major carriers that are already providing you broadband access, but it's not fiber optic, it's cable, guess what? As more and more people are going to demand broadband access, the access to that pipe is going to be limited, and there's going to be a need to upgrade the technology off of coaxial cable to fiber optic. So if you don't already have fiber optic cable and you live in a metropolitan area, a more urban area like perhaps Albany County, and your company is going to want to upgrade to fiber optic, this cost is going to prevent them from wanting to do that. In 2015, the state invested $500 million in the new New York broadband program. In her budget proposal, Governor Hochul has proposed $1.5 billion in the Connect All Broadband initiative. Keeping the tax that rises a cost to deploy fiber optic cable at the same time is counterproductive and needs to be scrapped. In her State of the State book, the governor states that over 30% of New Yorkers have only one choice of internet service. The fiber optic tax tax only continues this problem in upstate communities, nearly all of which have a state highway running through them. It's hard to get anywhere in the rural parts of New York State down just a town road or a county road. Almost all of our communities are connected, and therefore all this infrastructure is in a state highway. Even the state comptroller has listed this tax as a major impediment towards expanding broadband services. Now remember, we've already invested $500 million of taxpayer money in this initiative years ago, and the governor's proposing adding an additional $1.5 billion of taxpayer money. So $2 billion has been invested, and this tax, which has been around in the state budget for just 3 years, has collected a whopping $8 million of taxes. So we've got $8 million of this fiber tax holding up $2 billion worth of work. That right there should jump off the page at people. We must finally close the digital divide and ensure that every New Yorker has access to broadband. With this in mind, we're calling on Governor Hochul to eliminate this fiber tax in her 30-day amendments to the state budget. It's important, again, this was created in the state budget in 2019. It should go away in the state budget in 2022. Some of the conversations that I've had with senior members of the administration, and I want to share with you because I'm hoping that it gets to the right set of ears again, is that this fee is waived in the grant programs. They're quick to point that out. If you're in one of our state grant programs, there is no fiber tax fee. That's nice. But what they're forgetting is that if you're not in the grant project area, if you're just outside of it, you're a community that's just outside of it, you want that run, you knock on the cable door and say, hey, while you guys are working here, can you string that cable up to my house? $5,000 to $7,000 a mile if you're not in the grant. So that's something that I think that the governor needs to realize. It's not enough to just say, I'm not going to hit you with this fiber tax during our project work. It should be done. It should just be eliminated completely. It was created in the budget. It should be struck from the budget, and the time for her to do it is part of her 30-day amendment so that we can move on to more important public safety and economic development issues. But this is a no-brainer. It is nonpartisan. Both houses, members of both sides of the aisle have been calling for this. Dozens of letters have been written to the administration over the last couple of years. Now is the time to eliminate that. So with that said, I again thank my colleagues for being here today, and I want to introduce a couple people that are going to be speaking further on this. It's across the state from the Vermont line all the way to Western New York. And I first want to turn over to our ranking member of the Finance Committee, Senator Tom O'Mara. Senator.
Thank you, Dan. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and it's very timely that we're doing this as the transportation budget hearing is going on as we speak, and I need to get back to that as soon as I can. This is one of the issues that's being discussed there. You know, in all my years in Albany, I don't think I've seen anything more counterproductive to what our stated goals are in New York State. And one of the major goals is expanding broadband to cover everywhere. I represent an area of the Finger Lakes and Southern Tier that is very rural. You know, and we're talking about state highway taxes on broadband. You know, we're not talking about, I mean, we are talking about the 4-lane limited access highways that are state highways that crisscross our state, but we're also talking about the state routes that make up a lot of the routes in the Finger Lakes and in the Southern Tier region. You know, you have State Route 13 that runs north and south the length of the Finger Lakes, State Route 14, State Route 54, State Route 54A, and many others that this tax will be on. And those are roads that have a lot of residences on them, people living there. And I point that out because one of the counties that I'm fortunate to represent is Yates County, where Penn Yan and Dundee is. About 3 years ago, they were the first municipality in the nation to receive a USDA grant to build out a municipal broadband network in Yates County. They're preparing, drawing the maps for this, and then this state tax gets put on this project. So now they're redrawing their maps to avoid state roads to limit the taxes on the network as a whole, which will limit the access to those individuals that live along those state roads, when the state roads are often a more direct route, a shorter route, and probably a less expensive route to build out. But it's being redrawn, and this municipality is looking at avoiding state roads because of this. So as I said at the outset, there's really nothing more counterproductive to our overarching goal in New York State to build broadband out to everywhere. So a lot more can be built out. These extra taxes are just limiting that expansion. So I thank you for attending today. Thank you, Senator Stec, for putting this together today. And now I'll introduce my colleague, Senator Peter Oberacker. Pete. Thank you.
Thank you, and again, thank you all for coming and making time out of your busy day this afternoon to address this very important issue. Tax hikes, obstacles and barriers, and false promises. Those are the hallmarks of Albany. When it comes to closing the digital divide, the state has failed to be a true partner, especially in our rural areas. On one hand, we get announcements of grants designed to help expand the broadband service. On the other hand, we have additional taxes and overreaching regulations that make this expansion more costly. It's all an Albany shell game that's been going on for far too long. What's even worse is when promises are made for the low-cost internet. That's another Trojan horse. If people can't get access to broadband without paying thousands of dollars up front in what is known as aid to construction, the $25 or the $50 monthly fee is seemingly meaningless. I'm the ranker on the Internet and Technologies Committee, and I do not have broadband at my house. I guess that's kind of ironic in a way, but I fully understand the frustrations and what so many are going through. And I want to dispel another myth. Not every internet company is a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. In my district, I represent small, family-owned companies and co-ops that have been operating for generations. First as community telephone companies, now as internet providers. And they are perfectly positioned to run lines to these rural homes because they are familiar with the landscape. But the costs are highly prohibitive. New York State needs to take real steps to reduce the taxes and regulations that are holding back the broadband expansion. And we can start by eliminating the fiber tax. That one move will get trucks moving and lines run. You know, I hear from constituents every day regarding the lack of broadband. Parents call because their children can't complete their schoolwork. Seniors call because they can't get to the doctor or are offered this telehealth as a potential option, an option they can't access. And our rural areas are losing out on business opportunities. People can work from anywhere in the world if you have broadband. Entrepreneurs who want to start a business or current business owners who want to expand need to know that they will have this crucial service or they will simply look elsewhere. Reliable, affordable, high-speed broadband is vital for the economic development, emergency services, education, and quality of life. While Albany promises expansion, very real barriers exist that are making it more difficult to reach those in rural areas. The fiber-optic tax is simply just another money grab that discourages growth and is holding back entire communities. Eliminating this tax will pay real dividends. And I'll leave you with this saying where I am from in the very rural areas. Each and every accomplishment starts with a decision to try. We need to try. So with that, I would like to introduce Senator Pam Helming, who is a sponsor of legislation on this issue, and I'll turn it over to Senator Helming. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Oberacker. No new taxes, no new fees. That was my mantra from the first day that I took office. And that has been what this conference, our Republican conference, has stood for years. I was thrilled when the governor said that her budget proposal includes no new taxes. But as you heard here already, if we're going to keep people in this state, if we're going to support local businesses, if we're going to support our farmers and our school children, we need to eliminate taxes as well. We hear from our constituents all the time about affordability. Well, the number one issue is public safety, but we also hear about affordability. And with this fiber-optic tax in place, one thing that is not affordable to people in this state is access to broadband services. I live on a rural road. I reached out to the closest provider and asked about getting access at my home. The cost given to me was, yeah, we could get it to your house for $7,000. Who can afford that? I'm one of those people who was driving to the library and sitting in the library parking lot so that I could get an internet connection. And I have constituents still calling me in the year 2022 to talk about driving their kids to the public library parking lot so that they could get their schoolwork done. So I say thank you to our public libraries. They're doing an amazing job, right, of providing that service. But really what we're here to say today is to Governor Hochul that we need to repeal the fiber-optic tax. And the easiest way to get that done, the most expeditious way, of course, is to get that done in the budget. We want to see our Senate colleagues and our Assembly colleagues put that into their 30-day budget. We want the governor to put in our 30-day budget amendments, and we want our colleagues to put it in their one-house budgets. But short of that, as the senator said, I carry a bill that is a complete repeal of the fiber-optic tax. Now, we passed a similar bill earlier this year with bipartisan support. Every single senator voted in favor of a bill that will help us streamline broadband connection as it relates to utility pole attachments. That was an example of an amended bill that we were able to reach an agreement on. And now I hope that we can finally agree to repeal the fiber-optic tax. You heard from my colleagues why this is so incredibly important if we want to see the expansion of broadband services. We need equitable broadband services for all New Yorkers. We need to get this done, and we need to get it done now. At this point, it's my honor to present to you Senator George Borrillo, who co-sponsors several bills on the issue. Senator Borrillo.
Thank you. Thank you, Pam. First of all, I want to thank my colleagues for being here and Senator Stec for putting this together. You know, when the pandemic hit, we really found out how many people really didn't have access to broadband, because suddenly they went from working in an office to working at home, and our children went and had to go work remotely for school. At that time, our governor at the time, Andrew Cuomo, was still saying that 96% of New Yorkers had broadband service. Well, unless the entire 4% was in my Senate district, that was a lie. And it continues to be a lie. But at least now we have some people that are admitting it within this administration. We've seen the comptroller come out and say that roughly 1 in 4 rural households does not have high-speed internet access. But here we are, 2 years after this senseless tax was put in place, and nothing has yet to be done about it. And that's the real issue here. We watched as people suffered, as programs were canceled, as people's projects were really just scaled way back, in some cases 60, 70, 80% from what they originally had planned because of this tax. And yet nothing has been done. Now, I understand that there is bipartisan support for this, but the reality is this tax wasn't new. It was brought forth again and again and again. And one of the first things that the Democrats did when they took control of the Senate was to pass this fiber-optic tax. As it was mentioned, if you're running a water line, a sewer line, a telephone line, you don't pay this right-of-way tax. Only broadband. Why is that? You know, Senator Oberacker mentioned small community phone companies that are now in the broadband business. I have those in my district too. And they've told us that this has been devastating. They plan these projects out years in advance, and then they drop this tax on them, and they had to change things. Small family-owned companies like DFT Communications and others that have said that we just can't do it. Now, here's the ironic part. We put forth $500 million and now another $1.6 billion. And what are we saying? If you're taking government money, you don't have to pay the fee. But if you're paying your own way, you also have to pay the fee. Where's the sense in that? The other big issue is resurveying these utility poles. Now, I am not an expert on utility poles, but I'm pretty sure they don't get up and walk around. Why do you have to do a new survey of a utility pole that's been in place for, in some cases, decades? That's a money grab by the DOT. And I called the DOT. I talked to them about this. I spoke to their attorneys and accountants. And you know what they said was, hey, those guys are making a lot of money. They can pay it. That's what these people think. Because they live in New York City, where you run one fiber optic cable to a high rise, and you're servicing hundreds of customers. Then there's where we live, where you run a fiber optic cable for a mile and maybe hit 1 or 2 customers. That's what they don't understand. This is truly an issue that upstate New York suffers from the myopic view of the people, the bureaucrats that are running the DOT. So that's the fundamental problem here. We have to clear the field here. The biggest impediment to the expansion of rural broadband is New York State government, bottom line. And we need to end that immediately. We hope the governor does change this in her 30-day amendments.